Hello, and welcome to this week's session of Computer Networks. In today's session, we're going to look over some some very nice topics regarding simulation of computer networks. Now, please note and be aware that should we have been during in class environment, we would have had actual equipment to do these exercises on. However, in this particular case, we're just going to stick with a simulator. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going, as always, to look over the virtual campus first, because, well, why not? So we're in the Computer Networks tab. We're going all the way down, as always, to the last session, namely simulating networks. Please be aware that over here you have the attendance. So please go and check your attendance in. Also, in order to double check it, please write down your names in the chat. You also have two links. Sorry, these two links. Let me just open them. It will be easier to show you. Okay, yeah. Sorry for being partly stupid. They will take you to two of the most used network simulators, namely GNS3, which you can download for free, and Cisco's Packet Tracer, again downloadable for free and free of use. The only thing that you actually do have to do in order to use either of these tools is to create yourselves a free account on these sites. Both of them also, you see here that there is an introduction to Packet Tracer course. Both of the sites here will give you a short tutorial on how to actually use their simulators. You can do it if you want, not if you don't. The idea is that they're there and they are accessible to you at all times. More so, today you're going to have the slides that we're going to go over and two simulations here. Now these simulations are done in Packet Tracer. If time allows, I'll try to do them in GNS3 as well. However, please do not count on it until the end of the semester. So if you're going to come back, I don't know, later on, you may or may not find the simulations on GNS as well due to other logistical and mostly time constraints. Now here you can see, I'm sorry that it says lab 10 here and we're only at, well, we're at the 12th lab. But the most important thing here is that you see one that's incomplete and one that is complete. Now, the thing is that what we are going to attempt and what we're going to start to do today is start using Packet Tracer in order to configure some basic components on routers and on PCs, and that's why you have two versions here completed. Now, at the end of the slides, you're going to see something that looks like a homework. Please do not take it as such. There will be no homework related to this particular lab. However, should you see how the final configuration files would look, you have that particular option. Again, let's see, did I go over everything that was here? So, these are the sessions my colleague held yesterday. The Cisco Packet Tracer link, the GNS3 link, yeah, everything is here. So next up, I'm going to go to the slides. As always, we have some beautiful slides here. I consider them beautiful anyway. And you see that there's not a lot of writing down here. That's good. It means that we can focus a bit more on the practice part. As always, we are going to try to finish within the 40 minutes allotted time, and whatever we don't finish, we'll come back to it next time. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So again, there should be 2 or 3 labs specific to equipment handling and equipment configuration. That's why we're just going to take it slow, and whatever we don't finish, we're going to come back next time and the week after that. So the slides are based, as I stated, on Packet Tracer. Being the fact that I am a Cisco trainer, I'm more familiar with this tool than GNS, and that's why it was a bit faster for me to do it this way. So Packet Tracer is a simulation tool developed by Cisco. As you can see there, it allows to simulate the behavior of networks. Now, one of the most important things when designing a network topology, when adding PCs and switches and routers and so on, is the fact that you don't always have the actual equipment to do it on. That's where simulations come in. Most of the simulations are spot on. That means that they even take into account loading times and configuration upholds and everything. And they are used in order to get certifications, to point on certification exams, because there are some parts of the world in which Cisco has academies and they do not necessarily have access to the full equipment array. That means that they actually don't have every equipment necessary to run every possible scenario and so on. And that is why simulators and simulations were developed. Now, as you can see here, it allows users to practice router and switch configuration using a graphical or command line interface. Please note that on simulations, you can use a graphical user interface. However, on most routers, save for Wi-Fi ones, it's mostly done via command line interface if you're directly connected to it, or you can access certain equipment via HTTP, or via the web, and that's how you get a similar graphical interface, but not exactly the one that you're going to see today. Today we're going to do a blend of both graphical and command line interface, so that you can see that everything that we actually do in the graphical interface computes and translates to a command line interface. Now, this slide is a wee bit small, so I am going to do it like this. You can pretty much see my screen, right? So it's a big ass slide with everything on top. I used the zoom bars to hide away the CTI and the title of the slide, and the graphical parts of the university, but we don't really care about those ones for now. So please be aware that when logging into an equipment, now whether this equipment is a Cisco-based equipment or any other networking equipment, there are such things known as user modes or configuration modes. And this is the primary reasoning behind it being that not everyone that can actually access a switch or a router should automatically have all the rights to do anything and everything on that particular device. Now we're going to discuss a little bit more on this in the last lab where we are going to go a little bit more over network security. But the idea is that whenever you log into an equipment, be it switch, router, or whatever, you should only have the minimal rights on that equipment to do your job, nothing more and nothing less. It's similar to Linux. Most of the commands are Linux based, and it's exactly as in Linux. So you have permissions to access files, you have permissions to read, permissions to write, permissions to execute. the things are similar on this end as well. So the first mode is considered a view-only mode, and it's called a user exec mode. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, so on the user exec commands, we have here ping, show, and enable. The most important thing here that you can see, we are not going to go into what these things actually do, but you see here that the show command is limited. Now, all of the user exec mode allows us to view some parameters, but not all of them. And definitely, absolutely, definitely, it does not allow us to configure or modify any parameter whatsoever. You can see here the default prompt for the particular device in the case in which we are in the user mode. Now, moving on to have the right to view every parameter whatsoever, we need to be in the privileged mode, the privileged executive mode. Now, of course, the going through different modes is password protected, but that's not something that we're going to talk about today as either. We're just going to try to familiarize ourselves with the basic principles, especially regarding the configuration of an equipment and the actual use of the simulator. So exec mode only shows us some parameters. By typing enable, we are able to enter in the privileged executive mode. Now this mode allows a full monitoring rights, which means that we can see every parameter on the router or the switch. It allows us some debug commands. It allows us the reload command. Have you ever seen the reload command in action? Not necessarily on a switch. Have you ever heard of such a command? Anyone? Have you studied Linux in operating systems? Okay, and what did you do? How did you study it? On actual PCs or VMs? Ah, that's why you don't know it. Okay, sorry, Constantin typed VM. So reload is a command similar to reboot. There is one major difference in between the two. So reboot enacts a sort of a power off mechanism as well. Reload doesn't. Reload doesn't cut the power to the equipment. It just simply empties all of the RAM and then fills it up as the system would normally boot. So reload is virtually a reboot or a softer version of reboot. Now, in order to actually do some configuration done, we have to type the command configure terminal, and that will allow us to go into the global configuration mode. Now, this is the full mode, and you can see here that you can do a lot of commands. These are, of course, only some of them, but there is one thing that I would like to make you attentive to raise your attention at. Please notice the default prompts. So if you're in the user exec, you've got the greater than sign, which is similar to Linux's user mode. Now the privileged mode has the hash key. Now the hash is similar to Linux's root permissions. Do you know what you can do in Linux with a root permission? Exactly, anything. The root is the greatest permission that you can have on a Linux system. Please be aware that in routers and switches, there is one more type of permission. So the so-called root or the privileged executive mode will only allow you to access the configuration, access it, that means seeing it, not modifying it. In order to actually do some modifying, sorry, the prompt will also include a config in parentheses before the hash key. And you can see here that we have different types. So if we are in the global configuration mode, there's the simple config in the parentheses. If we're on an interface such as Ethernet, for instance, you'll see the config if from interface. If you're doing router commands, as in configuration of routing protocols, you have the config router, and if you're doing line commands, you have the configure line. So this means that it's a graphical point to where exactly you are in the configuration environment. So whether you're in the global configuration mode, sorry, or specific configuration modes for interfaces or routers and so on, or routing parameters, sorry. Now, some of the commands which we are going to go over today, you'll be able to see that they are quite complicated, and please, you don't necessarily need to remember them, but they are good in the sense that you'll see the level of complexity behind the configuration protocols. So namely, if you type in host name, you will be able to give a name to the device. Now that name is the name that the device will be shown through the entire network. Or another example is IP address. For instance, if you want to configure an IP address, you have to type in IP address. Similar with interface, if you wish to go to a specific interface, you have to type interface or the shorthand initil. And you can see that from these particular lines and from these particular examples, configuring something is extremely difficult, especially if you know what it is that you actually want to do. So if you want to put on a name for the device, you have to type in name or host name. If you want to go to a specific interface, you have to type in interface. And if you want to configure an IP address, all you have to do is type IP address. Now, one of the particular lines that has always given me problems, especially when I first gave my certification exam, was the no shutdown command. Now, please be aware that on most networking equipment nowadays, and by most I mean there is an exception regarding extremely old networking equipment, and by that I usually mean, I don't know, T-Rex age, so really, really old. The interfaces, so the ports on the routers and the switches, are automatically shut down by default. In order for you to actually use an interface or a port or a cable, you have to enable said interface. Sorry about this, I stayed up a long time of the night reading. I got my hands on, well, it's not necessarily the newest Witcher book, but close enough. Well, it is in Romanian, but anyway. And again, sorry about the yawning. So the no shutdown command, sorry, basically enables the interface we want. Now, in the graphical environment, this is a comma. In the command line interface, you have to type in no shutdown or no sh. If you want a gateway, do you remember what a gateway is? A node in the network, all the requests get by there. Yes, so it's the exit of the current network, of the current local network. So in order to make sure that all of my packets actually leave the network, we have to use a gateway. The command for the gateway is IP default gateway. Now please note that when dealing with configuration files, there are two categories. So the first category is the running configuration or the startup configuration. What do you presume is the difference between the two? Where do we use a startup configuration? What could the startup be? Anyone? What does it mean to start up? Exactly similar. It's the default configuration, the basics. So whenever you push a power button, any system, be it router, switch, computer, mobile phone, laptop, console, any electronic device will go to its startup configuration because it starts up. Now, the running configuration is a wee bit different. The running configuration tends to go with the configuration that is currently running on the device. And this might be a little bit tricky, but think of a Word document. What were to happen if when you start up the Word or you open the Word document, it will automatically open to a startup configuration. The running configuration is similar to you actually typing uh, different lines and paragraphs and some such in Word. If you don't save them, then everything you've done will be returned to the startup version, so the blank document. The running configuration, again, is the version that you're working on. Granted, nowadays there are tools that automatically do some saves from time to time. The idea is that we're going to have some configurations that we're going to have to copy or save from the running configuration file to the startup configuration file. Now, these are some commands. All of these here are commands that are needed to configure a RIP protocol. Now, RIP doesn't stand for rest in peace. It stands for Routing Information Protocol. But as you can see here, there aren't all that many of them. So we've got the enable, which gives us from the user exec to the privileged exec mode, so the mode in which we can see stuff. We have to go into the configuration mode where we actually can configure stuff. And then we have to tell what we want to configure. In our case, the RIP protocol, the version, Now this, I'm sorry, this part is in Romania. I'll correct it. The no auto summary is an optional command similar to the version one. And all we have to do is give the networks that we want to transfer from one part to another. Now, all of this part right here, we're going to work on it next time without actually working on it too much. Again, you have some more things here that we're going to do next time, but I wish to stop here with the slides and go on the actual simulator. And we're going to type in and enter the Cisco's packet tracer. I see that we only have 7 more minutes left. Just in case we don't finish, I'm going to reconnect. But again, the idea for today is to just have some simple filling in of the form, and just so you to be aware that the commands, even if they are command line, they're not all that difficult. So over here, this is the packet simulator, which you can see that it's currently empty. And here we have network devices and devices, components, connections, miscellaneous, and so on. What we're going to do is add some network devices, some end devices, sorry, such as PCs. So it's a click and drag option, extremely simple. And I don't know, let's put this one here and add one more PC here. And this is the simplest way to add PCs. Now, if we want to go to networking devices, you can see that we have routers, switches, hubs, wireless devices, and security devices. What we're going to do is use some routers. I don't know, this one, for instance, and another one of these. And what we're else going to put in are some switches, because as if you recall, we usually stated that first off, we connect the PCs to switches, and then we're going to do that to routers. And this is the entire network topology that we're going to use with connections, of course. Now, we can use an automatic connection, that's the lightning bolt here, or lines. Now we have, I'm going to use automatic connections here, and you can see it's a click and drag, and that's it. More so, if I were to use the normal Ethernet cable, that's the full black line, it will tell us from which port on the current PC we want to connect it to. I'm going to choose fast Ethernet 0, and on the switch, as I'm going to click it, it will show me all the ports available on the switch, save for one. As you can see here, fast Ethernet 0/1 is missing. That means that it has already been used, and it has already been used by the PC we have previously connected. Now I connected both of my PCs to the first switch. I'm going to do a similar thing on the other side to the others. Fast Ethernet, and that's that. And now, as you can see on the first link, we have two green triangles that specifies that all the connections are working and the simulation is good enough and it should work. And on the other side, there are still, yellow bubbles. Can you see the yellow bubbles? There's the yellow bubble right here. Next up, we're going to take similar wires and we are going to type gigabit Ethernet 0 to the first router and similar 0 to 0 on the second one. Now, in order to have information cross from this part to this part, we are going to have a fault circuit in between the two. So we're going to add two more connections, over here. And this is it. As you can see, it's extremely difficult, but we're going to try to manage. Now, what I wanted to do today is show you a configuration. This is the graphical configuration interface. And as you can see here, we can have global settings, algorithm settings, routing settings, switchings, and interface settings. First of all, we're going to go to global settings and see here that we have host name. Now, as you recall, that is the command to actually give a name to the router. You see here that we have a display and the host name. The host name is what we can see from the configuration. In the lower part of the graphical interface, we can see the equivalent command line commands. So if we're going to type in B414, for instance, and hit enter, we can see that some command lines were filled. So we had enable, configure terminal, and the host name command. And that's as complicated as it is. Now, since we did this on the first, I'm going to type in, sorry, B414 on the display name so that we can easily see it on this working environment. However, I'm going to do a similar thing. Sorry. Would you like to enter? No. No. B413, who cares? We care not about these things. It's easier to just delete it and, you know, yes, and put in another. I screwed up, I'm sorry, I went a little bit too fast for the system to keep up. From gigabit to gigabit, and from gigabit to Ethernet is gigabit, this one. So, sorry, we're going to the command line. Would you like to enter the, oh, I typed in a yes for the first one. So over there on the first one, on this one, we had the graphical interface. On this one, we're going to have a command line interface, and the commands that we are going to run are similar to these ones. So we are now in the user executive mode. I typed in enable, and if you don't mind, I'm going to close this session now, and I'm going to come right back to it because we have less than a minute and I don't want to be cut off. Is that okay? 3, 2, 1, and I'll be right back.